When I was growing up, the concept of being goth or emo or in any way alternative was nearly always met with some level of negativity. Standing out in a way that went against the mainstream norms of Jane Norton bags, bleach blonde top knots, and Topshop skinnies was something that would immediately get you ostracized. Growing up in the 2000s and 2010s meant that my beliefs and physical appearance would often be the first thing to be picked apart by my peers. I was wearing thick eyeliner at 13, and I was also razor cutting my own hair not long after. And my hair wasn't the only thing I was cutting, am I right? Up top. I can't say that. I can't have that in the video. Is this in the video? Maybe. And because of this choice to stand out, I endured physical and verbal bullying on a near daily basis for a good portion of my young teenage and adult life, purely because my form of self-expression was just not seen as palatable. Being alternative for a lot of people, especially my generation and before, kind of meant resigning yourself to the contempt and ire of other people around you. Cases like Sophie Lancaster's often reminded us that our choice to stand out could have horrific consequences.
Basically, like, the way I think, well, I'm a bloke. I should expect these things to happen. I mean, I don't want them to happen, but there's every chance they will do. But the mentality of just someone going, okay, we're just beating him to, well, probably to death, so I'll beat up his girlfriend now. It doesn't make sense.
And TV shows like Snog, Marry, Avoid reinforce this idea that the way that we presented was worthy of ridicule. We were unfeminine or unmasculine, we were ugly, we were laughingstocks. The idea of natural beauty often conformed with the idea of being mainstream and palatable. However, we did see a cultural and social shift upon the arrival of 2020's lockdown. People who had originally folded under the pressure of expected and advertised beauty norms suddenly felt a lot more comfortable expressing themselves online. They had the safety to experiment with their fashion and their makeup without having to face people that they knew in real life. Instead, they could retreat to online social platforms such as TikTok, which often worked as an echo chamber of positivity from other like-minded people. And it was around the same time that styles like E-Kid, Kidcore, E-Girl, and Cutecore began to really gain some traction online and in real life. And to be sure, these styles absolutely had their flaws. For example, Cutecore often had issues with East Asian fetishization and bullying, and aesthetics like E-Kid were often heavily reliant on fast fashion outlets like Shein or Runway, in part due to the fact that these were some of the only stores offering affordable clothing during lockdown, and quite often people were a little bit more financially vulnerable during this time. But for all the negatives, and let's be clear, there were quite a few, it was the first time in my life that I'd actually experienced this shift where no longer did being alternative make you feel like freak of the week. I began to experience less in-person harassment and heckling for the way that I looked. And I'd actually argue that that still hasn't changed much. I'd actually say that people are significantly less bothered by the way that I look than they were even 5 or 6 years ago. And I guess for the most part, it's because the way that I now look and dress is no longer as shocking or as visceral to people. They've seen a million other people who dress in a weird, wacky way that maybe they don't understand, but otherwise doesn't impede on their lives. However, for all the good that this shift did do, there has inevitably been some unfortunate side effects. Partially due to the same pipeline that any fashion that becomes popular always goes down, but also due to the lack of subculture awareness that some of those participating have. And recent online trends have started to make me and many others question if being alternative and the idea and aesthetic of being alt has suddenly become the new mainstream. Has alternative become the new basic? So a recent social media trend that was predominantly taking place over on TikTok was people giving tips, tricks, and advice on how to look naturally alt, a phrase which in itself is a bit of a paradox. In these videos, predominantly good-looking, slim, white women come onto the camera to give tips about how you can look more alternative on a day-to-day basis, even if you're not necessarily dressing to the nines in alternative fashion or doing a heavy face of makeup. And these tips most often include dyeing your hair a darker, more edgy color, and also rocking a more alternative hairstyle, having visible facial piercings as well as potentially having tattoos if you're old enough, and also building up a day-to-day wardrobe of easy to style and distressed clothing.
These are 5 things I do to look naturally alternative on days where I literally cannot be bothered, but I don't want people to think I'm like basic. My hair. So definitely dyeing it black, definitely getting bangs, definitely having layers. I literally just brushed it today. Nothing done to it. You know, it kind of looks messy. I shaved them all off. Almost completely, so that when I draw them back on, they're straight and really thin. I have super thick eyebrows naturally. I'll try insert a photo here. Yeah, I don't always wash off my waterline or my mascara, so I kind of just have this like natural smudge most days. Building your wardrobe to look alternative is definitely a big thing. Having already distressed clothes like these, like it's all ripped. It's also kind of aged looking. It's a shirt I got from a concert the other night. So I definitely cater buying things to fit the look so that I can just throw things on most days and it kind of looks together. If you can afford them, 100% tattoos. I have these ones here. I also have some up the back of my legs. I have a small one on the back of my arm. I prefer black work. I was convinced by a tattoo artist to get some red when I first started getting tattoos because he was obsessed with it. But going back, I would definitely just stay with black work. I think that naturally just looks more alternative, but it's also because color just doesn't really suit me.
Here's how you look naturally alt, okay? Step 1, get tattoos. Step 2, get piercings. Step 3, dye your lashes and your eyebrows.
And sure, theoretically, these items and tips do help with a more stereotypical, edgy, alternative look. But the thing is, nobody, literally nobody, looks naturally alternative. Sure, when I wake up in the morning, even without any makeup on or my favorite clothes, no one's probably gonna confuse me for a girl that buys the latest Lululemon clothing. I do have dyed hair in an alternative haircut. I have facial piercing like my lip rings. Of course, I am very pale and very under-rested. But again, most of those things aren't natural. I would definitely say that I was alternative before I had the agency or the money to look the way I do now. My natural hair color is blonde and my natural hair texture is curly. Up until the age of 16, I was only allowed to have my earlobes pierced, and when I was 16, I was finally allowed to dye my hair box dye black. Before then, I was only allowed to have temporary streaks of bright colors if and when the school would let it slide, because again, most of the time the school would be very, very heavy on cracking down on unnatural colors. I also didn't have super expensive, edgy, distressed clothing. Most of what I wore on a day-to-day basis outside of my time at school was hand-me-down band t-shirts from my dad and cheap Primark stockings. Even as a uni graduate, as an adult who has to pay taxes and finally has some of their own money, I was mostly restricted on what I can wear on a day-to-day because most jobs have a uniform. Meaning, like most ordinary people, I was only able to really dress like myself on the weekends or on my holidays when I didn't have to answer to anybody. Again, most people do kind of have to work to survive, and if you do want to buy edgy clothing or pay for piercings and tattoos, you usually have to have a job. Again, these tips and tricks in theory could work well for people who are trying to look a little bit more edgy and alternative when they maybe are adhering to a dress code at school or a uniform at work. But to me, the idea of calling it naturally alt feels very deceptive. For the most part, being alternative is just as much about your aesthetics as it is about your political values, as your social values. You could easily dress punk in all designer brands, but by proxy, you're kind of in direct conflict with a lot of the culture and beliefs of that subculture. Not to mention that as this trend was gaining traction in a similar way to the clean goth trend, a lot of alt POC were pointing out how odd it is to make such a broad term like alt boil down to Eurocentric standards of beauty and whiteness. Now, to be clear, I genuinely don't believe that was the intent from the creators who were predominantly making these videos, as I myself have made videos on J fashion and have had no racial bias when doing so. I just like to talk about the fashions and give tips and tricks and give my yapping opinion on things. However, quite often comments under these naturally alternative videos were really reaffirming a consistent issue within alternative spaces, this being varying forms of racism. People very boldly stating that being white or very pale was a pretty core part of looking alternative, something which, for anyone with a hint more melanin than Casper the Friendly Ghost, can only be achieved with heavy makeup. The same can be said for things like a straight defined nose, something which again can be less common for some POC who may have flatter or broader noses. Having a straight defined nose that looks alternative is something that you can only attain naturally if you're lucky, or you have to pay out a lot of money to buy. It's really not that unreasonable that POC often feel on edge or excluded from trends like this, because sadly racism in alternative spaces is fairly commonplace despite the fact that it really shouldn't be. If racist misogynistic arse-hats like Jake Monroe can still produce monetized videos talking about the white replacement theory on YouTube, I'm not surprised that alternative spaces can seem incredibly unwelcoming or unsafe.
So here's my proposal, as clearly as I can possibly put it. I encourage new content creators out there, new alternative influencers, to start using the same red pill, get this political shit out of our subculture rhetoric that I'm also doing. I encourage other creators to start standing up to these ugly goblins that are forcing us to listen to them, to believe what they believe in order to continue enjoying the subculture, because it's in their sweaty, fat hands, and they won't let us get to it until we're like, oh yeah, Antifa's great. We should have more ideological weirdos in schools. Get them while they're young. Yeah. Liberal white women are the biggest offenders for performative altruistic behavior to make themselves feel really good. See, there's been a single unified enemy that they've been presented with, and that's me, baby. It's the white man. What's the fastest way to get rid of the white man? Yeah, as many illegal immigrants as they can possibly take, and then some more.
I'm only 5'10", and I sincerely wish I was about 4 inches taller.
Also, just as an FYI, I'm never going to do a dedicated video on Jake Monroe because, to be quite frank, he doesn't deserve my audience, he doesn't deserve my reach, because, to be quite blunt, his views are as dog shit as his opinions. However, I do want to point out that men like this, people who are stating red pill goth and being woke is actually the mainstream opinion now, are actually, like, insufferable and stupid and are very often not welcome in alternative spaces. Men like Jake Monroe don't take part in their local communities, and I'm going to tell you why, because nobody fucking likes them. Honestly, me and all my homies hate this 5'10" gothic Pillsbury doughboy. Very quickly, this idea of what makes somebody naturally alternative became extremely rigid, which is ironic considering that being alternative means not adhering or caring or trying to form yourself to mainstream norms. And Eurocentric standards of whiteness and beauty are as mainstream as they come. Some people state heavy emphasis on hairstyle and color. Having pin straight black hair is just not achievable or natural for a lot of people. A lot of black alternative people tend to have coily textured hair. The same can be said with baby bangs, which again require a level of maintenance and straightening to obtain. As for hair color, there is nothing natural about me dyeing my raccoon stripes pink or having a blue and pink underglow to my hair. Dyeing your hair with chemicals from a box is quite literally the antithesis of natural beauty. Being alternative is almost always a rejection of beauty standards and adhering to societal expectations. There should be, and has never really been, a hard guideline on what alternative should look like. Sure, certain styles may actually have common theming or certain rules to fit within that style, but the term alternative is simply an umbrella term that incorporates a bunch of socially and politically left beliefs, as well as a massive roster of different alternative subcultures and styles. So for example, if you're punk, you're alternative, but if you're alt, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a punk. A lot of people like to point out that our favorite white women in horror, such as Mia Goth or Winona Ryder, look naturally alternative. But I do want to point out that we probably only think that way because we know them for their roles in horror films. If they dressed in mainstream fashion and didn't have a history of being interested in alternative cinema, we probably wouldn't see them that way. Speaking of which, with this whole naturally alternative trend, it made me start thinking of why we only tend to see darker, more edgy styles as being alternative. Now, most people tend to think of subcultures and styles like emo, punk, goth, or scene when it comes to alternative. However, it's really important to recognize that not all alternative subcultures are soaked in this Gotham-esque angst. Some of the most socially and politically vocal people I know don't defy social norms through dark, edgy clothing. In fact, they actually challenge people's expectations through the exact opposite, by being colorful and preppy and fun. I talk about J-fashion on my page a lot for good reason. As I've said before, and I'll say again, alternative fashion and subcultures usually emerge during times of political and social unease. However, Japan has had a very unique consistency of challenging gender norms, social perception, and social struggles through more kawaii fashion. Lolita, also known as EGL to avoid confusion with Nabokov's book, came into being off the back of otome fashion in the 1970s through brands like Milk and Angelic Pretty. Lolita challenged the pressures of Japanese womanhood by focusing on the whimsy and fun of hyper-feminine clothing. Taking great inspiration from French Rococo and Victorian fashion, it was a style that de-centered men's ideas of what looked good on a woman or what a woman should look like, and instead put that focus solely back onto what women wanted to look like for themselves. Ornate dresses with cute cupcake silhouettes, and even creating community activities like going to get afternoon tea together or going shopping together.
Lolita has really helped me feel like I belong and I have a purpose.
Incorporating Lolita with my religion really strengthened my bond to it.
For me, I don't change who I am when I'm wearing Lolita. I'm still the same person, I'm just in cute clothes.
It's kind of like coding myself in cuteness. It just Magically just somehow gives me more confidence to do things.
It's really easy to assume when looking at Lolita that it doesn't fit under this alternative fashion umbrella. But in reality, it's just as counterculture and rebellious as its darker siblings. Even the ecosystem within the community is self-preserving, with those interested in the fashion often supporting indie and popular brands that only exist because of the support of the Lolita community, as well as buying from independent artists. The same can be said for styles like Decora, another very loud and often colourful fashion that is very unique to the individual wearer, stacking on layers of colours and accessories and clothing that make the wearer feel good. And you may say, well, how is that alternative? Well, simply put, Decora has no beauty standards or rules. You can base your outfit around a certain character, such as Oshi Decora, or you can even just go off a basic colour or theme. And many people who wear the style quite literally just create their outfits based on how they feel good that day. Choosing how you want to look based on nothing but what makes you happy is arguably super fucking alternative. Living your life so visually self-assured screams being alternative to me. And I think this is really where the crux of the issue comes in for me. I think a lot of people who love alternative fashion or aesthetics tend to feel like they have to conform to this rigid expectation of beauty and physique. Social media does reinforce this idea of assimilating in order to get virtual affirmation. It kind of low-key reminds me of lesbian archetypes, where if you're not a lipstick lesbian or a Dickies wearing mask, you kind of feel like you don't belong in the community, and quite often if you go into gay bars, you don't fit in either. Like, God forbid a girl wants to serve Adam Sandler one day and then Bisque doll the next. For me, I like to explore and wear a variety of clothing. One day I might be in a full Lolita cord, and the next I'm wearing a far more grungy and androgynous outfit. I like to choose my outfits each day based on vibes. I don't really let myself overthink on a label to call myself, because ultimately I just prefer dressing to make me feel good. And the same applies with my tattoos and piercings. I didn't get them to look more alternative, I got them because they feel like a natural extension of who I am, and they make me feel more at home in my own skin whenever I wake up or whenever I'm not in my makeup or favourite clothing. I choose the way that I want to look as an extension of who I am. For as much as I bitch and moan about social media, I generally consider its existence as a net positive. For every negative comment or dumb trend, I also see a wealth of conversation, self-expression, and free education. The global political landscape right now is looking bleak. It's looking really bad. And I am glad that we do have social media for all of its good and bad aspects, because without it, we'd be more or less relying on what politics and political parties are allowing us to be fed through television, newspapers, and outlets. The education system is consistently proven to be a failure, but it's really reassuring that queer kids and those who need more history can go onto places like TikTok and actually have historians giving away information for free at the touch of a button. However, I will also say that sites like TikTok and other social media platforms have definitely commodified the existence of alternative fashion and subcultures. So often I see people who advertise themselves as alternative or goth or punk, posting videos advertising TikTok shop products, which are more often than not just Alibaba fast fashion resellers. Or even worse, a lot of young people who have been indoctrinated into this idea that they have to look fully alternative all at once, often arguing in comment sections in favour of unethical art thieves such as Romwe and Shein. The entitlement to an aesthetic under the guise of accessibility and income, all at the cost of other working class people in third world countries. You're putting clothes on your back by stepping on theirs. And look, I'm not talking about the essential bits for people who very obviously just need access to day-to-day clothing because they do have incredibly low income. And I'm not even going to criticise the odd thing or two from a fast fashion retailer. I'm also going to recognise that a lot of brands don't offer plus-size inclusive fashion, and many other popular brands do use fast fashion practices as well. We are in an inescapable capitalist hellscape, and I'm fully aware of it, and it's very hard to talk about it without being a hypocrite. But what I'm talking about is these often £50 to £100 Romwe and Shein hauls posted every other month all over social media, often with no awareness of styling and often just purchased in a transparent attempt to align with a pre-packaged identity. One of my best pieces of advice for your wallet and wardrobe is to look at secondhand sites like Vinted, Depop, Mercari, eBay, and of course go to your local thrift stores and charity shops. A lot of people like to say there's only granny clothing there, but then people forget that a lot of goths just used and upcycled and dyed and reworked granny clothing back in like the 70s and shit. Like, that is normal and commonplace. And often a little bit of online patience can yield great results, with brand names being sold cheap by people who don't know the value, or even just discovering items that you otherwise probably wouldn't have picked up in store but are really, really cheap and suit your wardrobe or needs. I buy a lot of my clothing clothing secondhand from sites like Vinted and Mercari. You don't need to commit to hair dye, tattoos, piercing, or babying your bangs to be alternative. It can start as simply as just by being involved in your local scenes, listening to the music associated with the subculture that you like, and be present enough to be vocal socially and politically. Alternative people should be registering to vote and going to the voting polls in order to stop fascists and alt-right nutjobs going into politics. Alternative people should feel confident speaking up and offering their soapbox to the experiences of minority groups. Being alt starts with the simple rejection of being palatable. That is something that can never be taken away or purchased through a TikTok shop link. But I guess let me know, what do you think of the state of alternative subcultures and styles online versus in real life? Do you think that in-person communities are typically more safe and inclusive and friendly? Or do you think there is a lot of change that needs to be done because those places are also not very welcoming either? And also please do give some tips and tricks down below to baby bats or newbies who are wanting to get into alternative subcultures or don't know where to buy things. Give some advice down below. I want to give a big beautiful smooch and thank you to my lovely patrons, with our Oshi tier members being Nina Hopkins, Idiot Insomniac, Lucy, Shy Raw, Harakivo, Danny16, Sweet Misery, Meryl Lyram, and the Galmar. Starting as low as the casual tier, you can support me and what I do and get ad-free and downloadable access to all of my public content. But of course, if you pledge Otaku tier and above, not only will you get your name shouted out as a contributor to what I do, but you'll also get access to behind the scenes and bonus content. With my most recent behind the scenes video being my 30-minute Japan vlog from when I went back in February. But of course, the cheapest and easiest way of supporting me and what I do is by commenting down below, starting a discussion, liking the video, sharing the video, saving the video, and of course, hitting the subscribe button and the bell icon beside it to never miss an upload. Now it is time for the end of the video outfit check and some of your amazing fan art. Bye! Starting off on my head, again, we have my classic AliExpress goggles. I got them like 5 years ago. I have worn them so much. I've worn them to raves. I've worn them out and about just day to day. I wear them for filming. These have lasted. These are literally my go-to accessory. I love them. I have a very strong attachment to them. And again, I have worn them to death. Next up, we have my necklace, which is from Name Collective. We have my razor blade crucifix from Angel Type. And we have the Nana x Vivienne Westwood collaboration orb necklace. The crop top that I'm wearing is from Lucy and Yak because my friend used to work there, so she would get me mad discounts, and I won't lie, their crop tops are really nice quality. Then I'm wearing a Free People jumper, which I got a year or so ago when I was in London. I just really like a baggy jumper. I really like the color and the fit of it. I think it's really cute. And then low-key, I'm actually kind of excited to show off my trousers because I actually have these person sole jeans, but I am having to break in the waistband because they do fit, but they're very stiff because they are just like heavy jeans, but they're now starting to feel comfy. I did the whole like soaking it in hot water and then wearing it for like 24 hours, and that has worked. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye!